It was only 2 days before my granddaughter Valerie's wedding when I told her that she should never, under any circumstances, tell her mother-in-law about her inheritance of $5,200,000. I warned her that the woman was not who she thought she was. Thank God she listened to me, because 24 hours after the wedding, her husband's family showed up at our door with a notary and legal documents demanding that Valerie sign a waiver for all marital assets. They claimed that a simple girl with no family didn't deserve to share in their prestigious family's estate. They never imagined that my granddaughter owned property in 3 different cities and that I had spent 30 years building a quiet empire specifically to protect her from people like them. What happened when Valerie pulled out her own documents and showed them who they had really married into was something that family will never forget. The look on Beatrice Sterling Vane's face, my own peer in the community, when she discovered that the granddaughter she considered a nobody was actually wealthier than her entire family combined, was an image I will cherish for the rest of my days. Stay with my story until the end. It all began 22 years ago when my daughter, Tricia, died in a car accident on the highway heading from Charlotte toward Atlanta. Valerie was barely 3 years old. The girl's father, a useless man named Andre, had abandoned Tricia during the pregnancy. He never gave a cent. He never even asked about the baby. My husband had passed away 2 years earlier from a heart attack, so when I lost my only daughter, I was left completely alone with that little girl who was still in diapers. She called me Mama because she didn't understand that her real mother would never be coming home. My name is Clementine Thorne. I am 68 years old, and that little girl became the reason I kept breathing when all I wanted to do was die of grief. I worked as a legal secretary at a law firm downtown. I didn't earn much, just enough to pay the rent on our modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. But I learned something very valuable at that firm. I learned how laws, inheritances, properties, and contracts worked. For years, I observed and I learned. The lawyers trusted me and explained cases to me. I listened to everything with full attention. In the meantime, I raised Valerie with the little we had. I packed her lunchbox every morning for school. We walked together to the bus stop because we didn't have a car, and in the evenings, I did typing work for other people to earn extra money. On weekends, I cleaned houses. Valerie would come with me and do her homework, sitting in the kitchens of huge mansions while I mopped and dusted. She never complained. She was a sweet, grateful, and studious girl who always got straight A's. Her teachers always praised her at school meetings, saying she was special, intelligent, and respectful. I was so proud of her. I promised her she would have a better life than mine, that she would go to college, and that she would never want for anything. I kept that promise, even if it cost me my health. When Valerie was 7, something changed my life forever. Silas Abernathy, one of the senior partners at the firm where I worked, passed away from cancer. He was an older man with no family and no children. I had cared for him during his final months, bringing him home-cooked meals to the office and accompanying him to his medical appointments. I stayed late working just to help him get his affairs in order. He thanked me in a way I never imagined. He left me a small house on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, and $50,000. I nearly fainted when the lawyer read me the will. It was more money than I had seen in my entire life. I cried for days, but I wasn't foolish. I didn't shout it from the rooftops. I didn't immediately move to a bigger house or start buying expensive things. I kept working at the firm, kept living in the same modest apartment, and kept wearing the same simple clothes. But I invested that money with intelligence. I bought a small commercial space and rented it out to a pharmacy. With the profits from that rent, 2 years later I bought another space, then another. I kept living as if I had nothing, but my wealth grew in silence. No one knew, not the neighbors, not my coworkers, not even Valerie. She was still too young. I wanted to protect her and teach her the value of hard work, humility, and effort. I didn't want her to grow up spoiled or have people approach her only for her money. So I kept my secret like a buried treasure that only I knew about. The years passed, and Valerie grew up beautiful, intelligent, and kind. She studied business administration at a state university. I paid for her commute, her books, and everything she needed, but she thought that money came from my salary and my side jobs. She graduated with honors at 23. She got a job at an import-export company. She was responsible, thrifty, and a good daughter. She helped me with the household expenses, even though I told her it wasn't necessary. Every night we had dinner together and talked about everything. She was my companion, my joy, and my reason for living. When she turned 25, she met RJ at a work training session. He was an industrial engineer, the son of a family that considered themselves high society in our city. His mother, Beatrice Sterling Vane, flaunted her last name as if it were European royalty. They had a big house in a gated community, 2 new cars, and that attitude of superiority common in people who confuse money with class. When RJ first took Valerie to his house, Beatrice received her with a smile so fake that even I felt it when my granddaughter told me about it later. She asked prying questions about her family, where we lived, and what I did for a living. Valerie, innocent and in love, answered everything honestly. She told them I was a secretary, that we lived in a rented apartment, that her mom had died, and that her dad was never around. I saw how Beatrice's face transformed into a look of barely disguised contempt. But RJ was truly in love. He was a good young man, hard-working, and respectful toward me. He came to visit us at our apartment without shame. He ate my home-cooked meals with gusto and helped me fix things around the house. I could see he loved her sincerely, regardless of her lack of money or an important family. But Beatrice was another story. Every time I went to their house for a family gathering, she treated me with a condescension that made my blood boil. She would ask with fake sweetness if I didn't get too tired working at my age. She offered me clothes she claimed she didn't use anymore, even though they were in perfect condition, as if I were a beggar. She told Valerie that after getting married, she would have to learn to move in certain social circles, and that she would need to improve the way she dressed and spoke. She hinted that my granddaughter was very lucky. A man like RJ had even noticed her. I would grit my teeth and smile. Valerie begged me not to make a scene or say anything, insisting she could handle her mother-in-law. She promised me that once they were married, they would live their own lives, and Beatrice's influence would fade. I agreed to stay quiet, but not because I was foolish or submissive. I stayed quiet because I was observing, analyzing, and preparing. My instinct told me that woman was dangerous and that her fake kindness hid dark intentions. And my instinct had never failed me. I began to quietly investigate the Sterling Vane family. I asked my contacts at the law firm, acquaintances at banks, and people who moved in those circles. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions. The Sterling Vane family lived on appearances. They had massive debts. Their big house was mortgaged to the hilt. Those luxury cars were bought on credit with overdue payments. The business owned by RJ's father, a construction supply company, was in the red. They maintained their lifestyle with maxed-out credit cards and loans from relatives. But to the outside world, they projected an image of success and prosperity. Beatrice was desperate to marry RJ off to a girl from a wealthy family who could inject fresh cash into their finances. When Valerie appeared, a girl with no apparent resources, no powerful family, and no social connections, Beatrice saw a threat to her plans. However, she couldn't openly oppose it because RJ was completely in love and had made it clear he would marry Valerie with or without his family's blessing. The months leading up to the wedding were a minefield. Beatrice criticized every decision we made. The wedding dress Valerie chose seemed too simple to her. The reception hall we could afford was too modest for her taste. The guest list had to include all her important friends, even if it meant removing Valerie's cousins and aunts. I paid for everything I could without raising suspicions, justifying the money by saying I had saved for years and had sold some of my mother's jewelry. Beatrice accepted the money with a twisted smile, as if we were doing Valerie a favor by letting her marry her precious son. There was one moment in particular that showed me who that woman really was. 1 month before the wedding, Beatrice organized a family lunch at her house, supposedly so the two families could get to know each other better. She invited her sisters, her cousins, and her friends from the social club. On Valerie's side, it was just her and me, because we had no other close family. Throughout the lunch, Beatrice's friends looked at me with poorly hidden pity. One of them, a stout woman with too much jewelry, asked Valerie directly how she had met RJ, as if she couldn't believe my granddaughter had access to him naturally. Another commented on how beautiful it was that love didn't care about social classes, as if Valerie were a maid who had trapped the boss's son. I endured it. Valerie squeezed my hand under the table, asking for patience. But the worst came after the meal, when Beatrice took me aside into the kitchen under the pretext of showing me something. She closed the door and, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, told me she wanted to talk woman to woman. She said she understood I had done my best raising Valerie alone, and that it was admirable how I'd brought her up with so little. But now, she said, Valerie would become part of a family with a certain social status and expectations. She suggested it would be better if I kept a low profile and didn't show up much at social events so as not to embarrass Valerie. She even offered to give me a monthly allowance so I could live comfortably and not have to work so much. That way, Valerie wouldn't have to worry about me. She framed it as an act of generosity, but I understood the message perfectly. They wanted to buy my absence. They wanted me to disappear from my granddaughter's social life so she could be molded according to that hypocritical family standards. I left that kitchen shaking, not with fear, but with rage. Yet I kept my composure. I thanked Beatrice politely for her concern and told her I would think about it. That night, when Valerie and I returned home, I sat down with her for a very serious conversation. I asked if she truly loved RJ and if she was absolutely sure about marrying him. She told me yes, she loved him with all her heart, that he wasn't like his mother, and that he respected both her and me. I believed her because I had seen RJ's character myself. The problem wasn't him. It was his family. I told her that was fine, that I respected her decision and would always support her, but she had to promise me one thing. She must never, under any circumstances, allow RJ's family to make her feel less than, to humiliate her, or to disrespect her. She promised me she wouldn't. And then I made a decision. It was time to tell Valerie the truth. She was getting married and starting her own family, and she deserved to know she wasn't unprotected, that she wasn't the poor, resourceless girl the Sterling Vanes thought she was. That night, I revealed everything. I showed her the documents for the properties I had accumulated over 20 years. I explained the investments I'd made, the savings I'd kept, and the wealth I'd built in silence. Valerie couldn't believe what she was seeing. She cried while hugging me, asking why I had never told her, and why I had let her grow up thinking we were poor. I explained that I wanted her to learn the value of things, to grow up as a hard-working and humble woman, and not to develop the arrogance that comes with easy money. I told her all of it was hers, that I had worked all those years to secure her future, but I asked her to keep the secret. I told her not to say anything to RJ yet, and certainly not to his family. Valerie asked why. I explained that I wanted to see who those people really were, and if they loved her for herself, or if they would change their attitude once they knew she had money. Valerie understood my point, but she insisted RJ was different and deserved to know. We reached an agreement. After the wedding, once they were living together and settled, she would tell RJ everything. But until then, we would keep the secret. And under no circumstances was she to tell Beatrice or the rest of the Sterling Vane family. Valerie agreed. The days before the wedding were filled with final preparations and growing tension with the groom's family. Beatrice kept imposing her opinions on every detail. She changed the reception menu without consulting us. She invited 20 more people from her side without asking if they would fit in the hall. She hired a different photographer than the one we chose because ours wasn't prestigious enough. I let her do all of it. Valerie was stressed but happy. RJ tried to mediate between his mother and us, although he usually ended up giving in to Beatrice's demands to avoid conflict. I observed everything with a calm that surprised my granddaughter. She asked me how I could stay so quiet in the face of such abuse. I told her it was because I knew something they didn't, and that patience always has its reward. 2 days before the wedding, Valerie and I were at home reviewing the final details. She was trying on her dress one last time. Watching her filled me with emotion and pride. That girl I had raised since she was 3 was now a beautiful, educated, professional woman about to get married. I felt blessed, but I also felt a weight in my chest. My instinct told me something wasn't right, that Beatrice was planning something. There was a look in her eyes lately, a kind of malicious satisfaction that made me nervous. That afternoon, as Valerie finished getting ready, I sat with her in her room and told her I needed to say something very important. I took her hands and looked her straight in the eye. I told her I loved her more than anything in this world, and that I had dedicated my entire life to protecting her. Precisely because of that love, I needed her to promise me one more thing. I told her she must never, under any circumstances, tell her mother-in-law about her inheritance, the properties, or the money. Not now, and not even after she was married. Valerie asked why, since they would eventually find out when she and RJ bought a house or made a major investment. I told her that when that time came, when they were legally married and living their lives, they could reveal the information gradually and carefully. But doing it before or immediately after the wedding would be a terrible mistake. I explained that Beatrice was not who she thought she was. She didn't see Valerie as a daughter-in-law, but as either a threat or an opportunity. If she found out about the money, her attitude would change completely, but not genuinely. It would be calculated. She might try to manipulate the situation, put ideas in RJ's head, or create conflicts to gain control over their finances. Valerie listened intently, though I saw in her eyes that she thought I was exaggerating. She said Beatrice was complicated, yes, but she didn't believe she was as bad as I thought. I insisted. I told her to trust me, that my years of life had taught me how to read people, and that the woman was dangerous. I asked her to please obey me in this, to listen to me even if she didn't fully understand my reasons. Finally, Valerie nodded. She promised she wouldn't say a word and would keep the secret for as long as I deemed necessary. She hugged me and thanked me for always looking out for her. I hugged her tight, feeling an enormous sense of relief. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but my instinct screamed that I had just avoided a disaster. The wedding day arrived, sunny and beautiful. Valerie looked radiant in her white dress. I was elegant in a pearl-colored dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. The ceremony at the church was moving. I cried when I saw my granddaughter walk down the aisle. RJ looked at her with so much love that even I was touched. I thought that maybe I was wrong, that maybe everything would turn out fine, and their love would be enough to overcome any obstacle their families put in their way. The reception was in a ballroom decorated with white flowers and gold lights. Beatrice had invited half the city, or so it seemed. There were people everywhere, mostly on the groom's side. On my side, there were only a few distant cousins, 2 of my friends from work, and my lifelong neighbors. I felt a bit out of place among so many fancy, high society people, but I kept my head held high. Valerie and RJ danced their first waltz as husband and wife. Then it was my turn to dance the traditional grandmother bride dance. As we danced, she whispered in my ear that she loved me, that I was the best grandmother in the world, and that everything she was she owed to me. I told her she was my pride, my treasure, and my reason for living. During the party, Beatrice moved among the guests as if she were royalty. She introduced RJ and Valerie to her friends, but always emphasized RJ's achievements while barely mentioning my granddaughter. When someone asked me about Valerie, Beatrice would step in, saying she was a very hard-working girl who had overcome many adversities, as if my granddaughter were a charity project her son had rescued from poverty. I just smiled and nodded, though I was seething inside. However, I stayed calm. The party ended around midnight. The newlyweds went to a hotel because they were leaving for a week-long honeymoon in the Bahamas the next day. I went home tired, but happy. I thought the worst had passed, and that we had survived the wedding without any major incidents. But I was wrong. The day after the wedding, a Sunday afternoon, the doorbell to my apartment rang. I opened the door and froze. There stood Beatrice, her husband, her sister Estelle, and a man I didn't know, dressed in a suit and carrying a briefcase. Beatrice walked into my house without waiting for an invitation, followed by the others. She asked with fake sweetness if we could talk for a moment. Confused and alarmed, I invited them into the living room. The man in the suit introduced himself as Mr. Halloway, a notary public. My heart began to race. Beatrice sat on my sofa as if it were her throne. Her husband stood behind her with his arms crossed. Her sister sat next to her with an unbearable look of smugness. The notary opened his briefcase and took out some documents. Beatrice began to speak in that sweet, poisonous voice I knew all too well. She said they had come for a courtesy visit, now that we were family, and wanted to make sure we were all on the same page regarding expectations and responsibilities. I didn't understand. I asked what she was talking about. Beatrice smiled and told me that, well, we all knew Valerie was a girl without resources, without an estate, and without a powerful family. Since she was entering the marriage without bringing anything material, Beatrice claimed it was only fair to protect RJ's and his family's assets. Mr. Halloway stepped in, explaining that they had prepared a prenuptial agreement, or rather a postnuptial waiver, that Valerie needed to sign. It basically stated that in the event of a divorce, Valerie would have no right to any property, investment, or asset in RJ's name or the Sterling Vane family name. I was speechless. I told them that was something Valerie and RJ needed to discuss between themselves and that I had nothing to do with it. Beatrice laughed condescendingly. She told me not to be naive, saying she knew perfectly well I had a lot of influence over Valerie and that my granddaughter did whatever I told her. That was why they had come to talk to me first. RJ's father spoke for the first time in an authoritative voice. He said they didn't want any trouble or for Valerie to feel bad, but this was a necessary measure to protect their family's interests. They expected me, as a mature and reasonable woman, to understand the situation and convince Valerie to sign the papers without making a scene. Beatrice's sister, Estelle, added maliciously that Valerie should be grateful to have married a man like RJ and could surely make this small sacrifice to prove she wasn't interested in the family's money. I felt my blood boil. I asked if RJ knew about this. Beatrice told me RJ was on his honeymoon and she didn't want to bother him with these boring legal matters. She said by the time he got back it would all be settled. In other words, they were planning to pressure Valerie into signing legal documents behind her own husband's back. I told them it was ridiculous and that I wouldn't participate in any plan to deceive or pressure my granddaughter. Beatrice's tone changed. She stood up and looked at me coldly. She told me I could do this the easy way or the hard way. She said if Valerie didn't sign voluntarily, they had the resources to make her life very difficult. They could influence her job, claiming they had connections all over the city, and a girl like her wouldn't easily find another job. She even threatened me, saying a woman my age shouldn't risk losing her job over stubbornness. She was blatantly threatening me in my own home, just one day after my granddaughter's wedding. I took a deep breath. I looked at that arrogant woman and her group of cowards and made a decision. I told them as calmly as I could that I understood their concern and that I would talk to Valerie to see what could be done. Beatrice smiled with satisfaction. She patted my shoulder as if I were an obedient pet. She said she knew I was an intelligent woman who would do the right thing. Mr. Halloway left a copy of the documents and his business card, telling me I had 1 week to get Valerie to his office to sign. Beatrice reminded me not to say anything to RJ, as it was a matter between women, between families. And then they left. I closed the door behind them and stood there, shaking with rage. I sat down and read the documents they had left. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a separation of assets. It included clauses where Valerie waived any future inheritance from the Sterling Vane family and any participation in their family businesses. They were practically stripping her of any legal rights to anything. It was a document designed to leave her with nothing before she even had a chance to build a life. I cried out of rage and helplessness, but then I dried my tears and told myself I would not let these people do this to my granddaughter. Valerie was on her honeymoon, happy and in love. I wasn't going to ruin that moment by calling her to tell her what had happened. It could wait a week. In the meantime, I had work to do. The next day, I went to the law firm where I worked. I asked to speak with Marcus Vance, one of the senior partners and someone I trusted. I told him the whole situation and showed him the documents the Sterling Vanes wanted Valerie to sign. Attorney Vance read the papers and shook his head. He told me it was one of the most abusive documents he had ever seen, clearly designed to take advantage of someone without legal knowledge. He asked about my granddaughter's real financial situation, so I told him everything. I showed him the documents for the properties I had in my name, the investments, and the savings. I explained that all of it was for Valerie, that I had spent 20 years building that estate to secure her future. Marcus Vance smiled. He told me that the Sterling Vane family was in for the surprise of their lives. He suggested we prepare proper legal documents to protect Valerie. He recommended that we formalize the transfer of the properties into her name before the Sterling Vanes could make any legal maneuvers. We spent the whole week preparing the paperwork. I transferred all the properties to Valerie's name. We set up a trust to protect the assets. We prepared documents proving that Valerie had entered the marriage with a considerable estate, not as the poor girl the Sterling Vanes believed her to be. Marcus helped me with everything, without charging me a single penny, saying that after all my years of loyal work at the firm, it was the least he could do. When Valerie returned from her honeymoon, radiant and happy, I invited her to my house. RJ dropped her off, saying he would take the opportunity to go see his parents. As soon as he left, I told Valerie everything that had happened. I showed her the documents his family wanted her to sign. I watched her face go from confusion to disbelief and then to fury. She couldn't believe her mother-in-law had come to my house the day after her wedding with a notary. She couldn't believe they had planned all this behind RJ's back. She cried out of rage and disappointment. She said she was going to call RJ immediately to tell him everything. I stopped her. I told her to wait, that we needed to handle this with intelligence. I explained everything I had done during the week, the documents we had prepared, and the properties that were now in her name. Valerie looked at me, unable to believe what she was hearing. I showed her the papers, the titles, and the bank statements. My granddaughter now had 3 commercial properties in prime areas of the city, the house in Savannah, and a trust with nearly $4 million in investments. Her total net worth was approximately $5,200,000. Valerie was in shock. She asked how it was possible when I had done all this and why I had never told her. I explained my reasoning again. I told her that now she understood why I had asked her not to tell her mother-in-law about the money. If Beatrice had known Valerie had money, she would never have shown her true face. We would never have discovered who they really were. I told Valerie she had an important decision to make. She could tell RJ everything and face his family together, or she could play Beatrice's game and give her a lesson she would never forget. Valerie asked what I had in mind. I told her we could pretend we were going to comply with what Beatrice wanted, making her feel powerful and victorious. And just when she thought she had won, we would reveal the truth. Not only was Valerie not poor, but she was wealthier than the entire Sterling Vane family combined. Valerie grew thoughtful. She said it sounded like revenge. I told her it wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was showing those people they couldn't treat others like valueless objects just because they didn't know their financial status. It was giving them a lesson in humility they clearly needed. But I made it clear the decision was hers. Valerie was silent for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, yes, she wanted to teach her mother-in-law a lesson. She was tired of being treated as less, as if she were lucky RJ had married her. That woman needed to learn that money doesn't grant class or character, but she asked that RJ not be hurt, as it wasn't his fault his mother was like that. I promised we would be careful not to hurt him unnecessarily. So we designed a plan. Valerie would call Beatrice and tell her she had spoken to me and that I had convinced her that signing the document was best for everyone. She would say she didn't want to cause trouble in her marriage over money matters, which didn't affect her anyway since she had nothing. She'd say she was willing to go to the notary's office to sign. Beatrice would be delighted and feel victorious. RJ would be at work and wouldn't find out anything until it was over. Valerie made the call that same day. I was by her side listening. She put on her best submissive voice. She told Beatrice she had talked to me and that I'd explained the document was just a legal formality to protect both parties. Beatrice could hardly contain her satisfaction. She told Valerie she knew she was an intelligent girl and had made the right choice. They agreed to meet the next morning at Mr. Halloway's office. Valerie asked her not to tell RJ yet because she didn't want to worry him with legal issues so soon after the wedding. Beatrice agreed, saying, "Women understand these things better." When Valerie hung up, she told me she had never felt such rage, that the condescension in her mother-in-law's voice made her nauseous. I hugged her and told her that by the next day, that woman would learn the most important lesson of her life. That night, Valerie had dinner with RJ in their new apartment. He asked what she had done that day, and she told him she'd visited me and we'd talked about the wedding. Women's stuff. RJ didn't suspect a thing. The next morning, Valerie and I dressed in simple, modest clothes. We wanted to look exactly as Beatrice expected us to, humble, without resources, and grateful for the crumbs they gave us. In my bag, I carried all the documents we had prepared: property titles, bank statements, trust papers, and valuations. I also brought something else: the research I had done on the Sterling Vane family's financial situation. I knew about their debts, their mortgages, and their overdue loans. If they were going to play dirty, I was prepared to play dirtier. We arrived at Mr. Halloway's office at the agreed time. Beatrice was already there with her husband and her sister Estelle. She had also brought another sister, Monique. They wanted to intimidate us with numbers. They greeted us with fake smiles. Beatrice gave me 2 kisses on the cheek as if we were best friends. She told Valerie she looked great and that marriage suited her. Mr. Halloway invited us into his office, a large room with a dark wood conference table. We sat around the table, Valerie and I on one side, the Sterling Vane family on the other. Mr. Halloway took out the documents and began explaining each clause in legal jargon. Valerie pretended not to understand very well and looked to me for approval. I nodded occasionally. Beatrice interrupted now and then to translate what the notary said into simpler terms, always using that condescending tone. She'd say things like, "Look, dear, this just means what's yours is yours and what's RJ's is RJ's. Very simple, nothing to worry about." I let her talk. Finally, Mr. Halloway finished and pushed the documents toward Valerie along with a pen. He said he needed her signature in 3 places. Valerie took the pen. Beatrice was smiling like the cat that ate the canary. Her husband looked bored, as if this were just a minor errand. The sisters looked satisfied. Valerie brought the pen to the paper and then stopped. She looked up at Beatrice and asked in an innocent voice if she was absolutely sure this document was necessary. Beatrice replied with poisonous sweetness that yes, it was for the good of everyone, so there would never be any misunderstandings. Valerie nodded slowly, then set the pen on the table and said that, unfortunately, she couldn't sign the document because it contained false information. The silence in the office was deafening. Beatrice blinked, confused. She asked what Valerie meant by false information. My granddaughter pointed to a specific clause stating she was entering the marriage with no assets or property. She said that wasn't true, that she did have an estate. Beatrice laughed nervously. She told her not to play around, that we all knew she was a hardworking girl but didn't have property or savings. Valerie looked at me. I opened my bag and pulled out the folder with all our documents. I placed them on the table. Valerie took the folder and began taking out papers one by one. The first was the title to a commercial space downtown in a high-value area. It was in Valerie Thorne's name. The second was another commercial title. The third was the house in Savannah. The fourth was the trust statement. Valerie placed each document in front of Beatrice calmly, without saying a word. Beatrice's face went from its normal color to red, and then to a deathly white. Her husband leaned in to look at the documents more closely. The sisters looked at each other, not understanding what was happening. Even Mr. Halloway seemed confused. Finally, when Valerie finished, she spoke. She explained clearly and firmly that she owned 3 fully paid-off commercial spaces valued at approximately $900,000, a house in Savannah worth $200,000, and a trust with $4 million in investments. Her total net worth was about $5,200,000. Therefore, she could not sign a document declaring she had no assets. Beatrice stammered, asking how it was possible, where the money had come from, and if this was some kind of joke. I stepped in. I told her calmly that it was no joke, that for the last 20 years I had worked, invested, and saved for one purpose: to secure my granddaughter's future. I told her I had built that wealth in silence, without flaunting it, and now everything was legally in Valerie's name. My granddaughter had entered the marriage financially independent and far more solvent than many families who considered themselves high society. RJ's father finally spoke, asking why we hadn't said anything before and why we'd hidden the information. Valerie answered firmly that it was because we wanted to know who they really were. If we had revealed the money from the start, we would never have seen their family's true character. They never would have dared to come to our house with legal documents trying to strip her of rights she didn't even have yet, and they wouldn't have treated her with condescension and pity for months. Beatrice tried to defend herself, saying they only wanted to protect their son and that it was normal for families with wealth. I interrupted her. I pulled out the other folder I had brought, the research on their financial situation. I told her that, speaking of wealth, I was aware their house was triple mortgaged and that they had over $150,000 in credit card debt. I mentioned the pending lawsuits from unpaid suppliers in her husband's business. I told them their family lived on appearances and credit, not real wealth, and that the only one actually generating a stable income was RJ with his engineer salary. How ironic, I said, that they wanted Valerie to sign a separation of assets when it was their son who entered the marriage with nothing, and my granddaughter, who had the real fortune. Beatrice's face completely collapsed. Her sisters looked down in shame. Her husband pounded the table and shouted, asking how I dared to investigate them, calling it an invasion of privacy. I responded calmly that they had started this game when they came to my house with threats and legal documents. I simply made sure I knew exactly who we were dealing with. Valerie stood up. She told Beatrice that she loved RJ with all her heart, and that was why she had married him. She had never cared that his family didn't have money, because money wasn't the most important thing in a marriage. But what she would not tolerate was the lack of respect, the manipulation, and the attempts to control her. She told them she had the resources to live whatever life she wanted, with or without her mother-in-law's approval. She said she would tell RJ everything that night because marriages are built on honesty, not secrets and manipulation. Beatrice tried to soften the situation, saying it was all a misunderstanding and that she only wanted what was best for everyone. Valerie cut her off. She said she didn't accept her fake apologies and expected to be treated with respect from then on, not because she had money, but because she was RJ's wife and a human being who deserved it. If Beatrice couldn't do that, their relationship would be cordial but distant. She took all her documents, put them in the folder, and we walked out of that office with our heads held high. Behind us remained a heavy, shameful silence. In the car, we didn't speak for several minutes. Then Valerie started to laugh. It was a nervous laugh at first, then it turned into full-blown hysterics. I laughed too. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. The look on Beatrice's face had been priceless. After months of treating us as if we were less and should be thankful for being accepted into their family, it turned out we were the ones with the real estate. That night, Valerie talked to RJ. She told him absolutely everything. The wealth I'd built, the property transfers, the scene at the notary's office, all of it. RJ was in shock. He couldn't believe his mother had done such a thing or had gone to my house with legal papers without consulting him. He was furious and ashamed. He apologized to Valerie 1,000 times, though she made it clear he wasn't to blame for his mother's actions. RJ went immediately to confront his parents. Valerie told me later it was a terrible fight. RJ yelled things at his mother he'd never said before. He told her he was ashamed of her behavior, that she had treated his wife like trash, and that she had tried to manipulate their marriage. Beatrice tried to justify herself, saying she was only protecting him. RJ told her he didn't need protection. He was an adult capable of making his own decisions. He said Valerie was his wife, and if his mother couldn't respect her, he would limit his relationship with them. Even his father blamed Beatrice for putting them in such a shameful position. The following weeks were tense. Beatrice tried to reach out to Valerie several times with apologies that sounded more like excuses. Valerie kept her distance. She made it clear the family relationship would continue out of respect for RJ. But she would never trust Beatrice again. RJ fully supported his wife. In fact, the revelation of Valerie's wealth didn't change his behavior toward her at all. He remained the same loving, respectful man who had fallen in love with a girl he thought had nothing. That confirmed we were right about him. The problem was never RJ. It was always his family. Over time, things settled into a new normal. Valerie and RJ bought a beautiful home in an exclusive area of the city. They paid in cash with no need for loans. When Beatrice saw the house, she almost fainted. It was larger and more luxurious than hers. Valerie decorated it with exquisite taste and had a beautiful garden where she planned to host family gatherings. She asked me to move in with them, saying they had plenty of room, but I politely declined. I told them newlyweds need their own space and intimacy. Besides, I was comfortable in my apartment. We'd have time to be together when the great-grandchildren arrived. Valerie kept working at her job. The money hadn't changed her. She was still the same hard-working, humble girl I had raised. She used her wealth wisely, investing, saving, and donating to causes she cared about. RJ was proud to have such a capable and independent wife. In fact, when his father's business finally went under due to accumulated debts, it was Valerie who offered him an interest-free loan so he could pay off his employees with dignity. Her father-in-law accepted the loan with a humility I never thought I'd see. That gesture showed Valerie was bigger than any grudge. She didn't use her money for revenge, but to help even those who had hurt her. Beatrice had to swallow her pride and accept that her daughter-in-law was more successful, more generous, and more dignified than she would ever be. Their relationship was never warm, but it at least became respectful. Beatrice learned to bite her tongue before making condescending comments. She learned that money doesn't buy class, and that true wealth lies in a person's character, not their bank account. 2 years after the wedding, Valerie got pregnant. When she gave me the news, I cried with joy. I was going to be a great-grandmother. That baby would be the 4th generation of our small family. During the pregnancy, I took care of Valerie, just like I did when she was a little girl. I cooked her nutritious meals and went with her to her doctor's appointments. We decorated the nursery together. Beatrice wanted to participate too. But Valerie set clear boundaries. She allowed her to be present, but not to make the decisions. A beautiful baby girl was born, whom they named Zora Clementine. She was named after me. When Valerie told me, I cried like I hadn't in years. That baby became the light of my life. I am 70 now. My hair is completely white. My hands are wrinkled with age spots, but my heart is full. I see Zora growing up surrounded by love, security, and opportunity. I see Valerie being the wonderful mother I knew she would be. I see RJ being a loving father and a devoted husband, and I know it was all worth it. Every extra hour I worked, every sacrifice I made, every dollar I saved instead of spending on myself, it was all worth it. The wealth I built wasn't really about the money. It was about giving my granddaughter options, freedom, and security. It was about ensuring she never had to endure humiliation out of economic necessity. It was about making sure she could choose her life based on love and dreams, not need. The lesson we learned is that a person's true value isn't measured in bank accounts or fancy last names. It's measured in character, dignity, and how we treat others, especially when we think they have nothing to offer us. Beatrice and her family showed their true character when they thought they were dealing with people without resources or power. They treated us with contempt because they thought they could do so without consequence. But life has a way of teaching humility to the arrogant. Today, at family gatherings, Beatrice is polite but quiet. She no longer makes comments about my clothes or where we come from. She no longer suggests Valerie needs to improve her speech or style. She has learned that appearances are deceiving and that you should never underestimate people based on what you see on the surface. Valerie tells me she sometimes feels sorry for her mother-in-law because it must be hard to live knowing your own pride made you look like a fool. I tell her pity is fine, but she should never forget the lesson. There are people in this world who only respect money and power, not humanity, and she must choose carefully whom she trusts with her heart. My granddaughter has applied that lesson to her life. She chooses her friends based on shared values, not social status. She is teaching Zora to treat everyone with respect, whether it's the school principal or the woman cleaning the restrooms. She donates generously to causes that help single mothers because she knows how hard that life is. She is creating a legacy not just of money, but of values, and that makes me prouder than any number in a bank account. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Yes, it was painful to see my granddaughter treated with contempt. Yes, it was hard to bite my tongue for months while that family looked down on us. But because of that, we saw who they really were. If we had revealed the wealth from the start, Beatrice would have treated us with fake respect motivated by greed. We never would have seen her true face. RJ would never have understood the toxicity of his family, and Valerie wouldn't have learned the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for herself. So in a way, I thank Beatrice for showing us who she was before it was too late. Her greed and classism gave us the gift of clarity. Now we live our lives with our eyes open, knowing exactly who we are dealing with. There are no unpleasant surprises waiting for us in the future, because we've already seen the worst that family could show, and we survived. More than that, we thrived. To all the women listening to my story, especially the grandmothers, the mothers, and the women raising children or grandchildren alone, I want to tell you something important. Your value does not depend on how much money you have in the bank. Your value is in your strength, your capacity to love, and your determination to give your children a better future. But I also want to tell you, it's okay to be smart with money. It's okay to save, to invest, and to plan. It's okay to build financial security, not for vanity, but for protection. In this world, money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy options. It buys the option to say no to abusive situations. It buys the option to walk away from toxic people. It buys the option to live with dignity. You don't have to shout what you have from the rooftops. In fact, it's wiser to keep a low profile. But know your value, know your resources, keep your paperwork in order, and protect your assets legally. Do not trust verbal promises or the kindness of people who haven't yet proven their character. And above all, teach your children and grandchildren that respect is earned through actions, not bank accounts. True wealth is found in genuine relationships, in the family that supports you, and in the friends who stand by you through thick and thin. Valerie has money now, yes, but what truly makes her rich is the love she shares with RJ, the beautiful family they are building, and the values she will pass on to Zora. Money is just a tool. It's a very useful tool, but only a tool. What matters is how you use it. Do you use it to humiliate others, like Beatrice did with her supposed social status? Or do you use it to build, to help, and to create opportunities, like Valerie does? That is the difference between having money and having class. Believe me, you can have all the money in the world and still be a miserable, empty person. Or you can have modest resources and be immensely rich in the things that truly matter. I spent 20 years building an estate for my granddaughter. But what I really gave her wasn't the properties or the money in the bank. I gave her an education, values, emotional strength, and the certainty that she would always have someone in her corner. That is what truly counts. The money was just the cherry on top, the tool that allows her to live those values with freedom and security. Today, when I go to Valerie's house and see Zora playing in that beautiful garden, when I see my granddaughter smiling without financial worries, and when I see RJ coming home from work to embrace his family with genuine love, I know I did the right thing. All my sacrifices, all those late nights, all those years of wearing simple clothes while saving every cent, it all made sense. Beatrice looks at me now with a mix of respect and resentment. She knows she severely underestimated me. She knows the humble old woman who came to her house in modest clothes turned out to be shrewder, more intelligent, and wealthier than her. That must sting her pride. But I don't feel satisfaction in her pain. I feel satisfaction in my granddaughter's triumph, in seeing her live the life she deserves with her head held high, without having to endure humiliation from anyone. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Silas Abernathy hadn't left me that inheritance all those years ago. Would I have been able to give Valerie the same life? Probably not in material terms, but I am certain I would have given her the same amount of love, values, and emotional guidance. Money amplified my possibilities, but it didn't create my love for her. That love was always there from the moment that 3-year-old girl hugged me, crying, the day we lost her mother. From that day on, I promised she would never want for anything, and I kept that promise in every way possible. I am an old woman now. My time in this world grows shorter every day, but I will leave in peace knowing I left my granddaughter prepared for life, that I left a legacy not just of money, but of dignity and strength. Little Zora will grow up hearing stories of her great-grandmother who worked hard, was shrewd, and protected her family with intelligence and love. If I could give you one last piece of advice, it would be this: never let anyone make you feel less because of your economic situation. Poverty is no shame. The true shame is arrogance, cruelty, and a lack of empathy. I have known very poor people with hearts of gold and very rich people with empty souls. Money doesn't define who you are. Your actions do. Beatrice had money, or the appearance of it, and used it to try and humiliate us. We had dignity and used it to stand firm. In the end, dignity won. It always does. It might not be immediate or obvious, but eventually the truth comes to light and people show who they really are. And when that moment comes, you want to be on the right side of history, on the side of love, humility, and integrity, not arrogance and meanness. My story isn't unique. I know there are thousands of women all over the country making huge sacrifices for their families, working 2 or 3 jobs to educate their children, and saving every penny for a better future. To all of you, I say, keep going. Your sacrifices are not in vain. Your children will see your example and learn that hard work and determination do bear fruit. And maybe, like in my case, life will give you unexpected opportunities that you can seize if you have been wise and forward-thinking. Don't wait for someone to rescue you. Rescue yourselves. Build your own wealth, even if it's small at first. Save a little each month. Invest in education, knowledge, and skills that no one can take away from you. Protect what you build legally and teach your children to do the same. The day Valerie signed the transfer papers, Attorney Vance told me something I'll never forget. He said I had done something extraordinary, that I'd built an empire in silence while everyone thought I was just a secretary. He said it required discipline, vision, and incredible willpower. I told him it wasn't extraordinary. It was just a grandmother's love, that any grandmother would do the same for her granddaughter. He shook his head and said no. Many people squander unexpected gains on valueless things. He said I had the wisdom to invest, to grow that money, and to protect it for decades without wasting it on unnecessary luxuries. And that was rare and admirable. His words made me reflect. Maybe there was something special in what I did, not because I'm better than others, but because I had clarity of purpose. From the moment I received that inheritance from Silas, I knew exactly what it was for. It was for Valerie. I never saw it as my money. I saw it as her future. That clarity gave me the strength to resist temptation, to keep living modestly, and to invest wisely. That clarity of purpose is what I want to pass on. When you know your why, the how becomes easier. My why was Valerie, to see her grow up secure, educated, and protected. It was ensuring she never had to depend on anyone, so she could make decisions based on what she wanted, not what she needed financially. And I succeeded. Against all odds, despite starting from zero and raising a girl alone while working full-time, I succeeded, and if I could do it, you can too. I'm not saying everyone will receive an unexpected inheritance or accumulate millions of dollars. The amount isn't what's important. The principle is. It's the principle of thinking long-term, sacrificing immediate gratification for future security, being strategic instead of just reactive, and protecting your family with practical foresight. Valerie tells me that when Zora grows up, she's going to tell her this story. She'll tell her that her great-grandmother was a woman who didn't let herself be defined by circumstances, that she took control of her destiny and played the game of life with intelligence and strategy. She'll say I was humble but not naive, kind but not foolish, and that I forgave but didn't forget. Those are the lessons I want to leave behind. Looking back, the family that looked at us with pity for being poor turned out to be the ones with real financial problems. The family that flaunted social status turned out to be in debt up to their necks. And the humble old woman with her resourceless granddaughter turned out to have more money than all of them combined. Life has a peculiar sense of humor, but beyond the irony, there is a lesson in justice. Truth always comes to light, and reality eventually shows itself. Beatrice lived in a house of cards built on credit and appearances. One day, that house collapsed. We lived modest lives built on a solid foundation of work and savings. When the time came to show our cards, it was clear who really had what, and that revelation changed our family dynamics forever. RJ learned a valuable lesson about not judging people by their apparent financial situation. He learned his wife was far more capable and independent than he imagined. Instead of feeling threatened, he felt proud. He once told me he had fallen in love with Valerie when he thought she was an ordinary girl, and knowing she was extraordinary only confirmed he had chosen well. That won me over completely. Now, when we gather as a family, there is a new respect in the air. Beatrice no longer acts as if she's doing Valerie a favor by accepting her into the family because she knows it's the other way around. It was Valerie who showed generosity by lending money to her father-in-law when his business failed. It is Valerie who holds the power in this relationship, though she never uses it to humiliate or control. She only uses it to set healthy boundaries and demand respect. That is real power, not the power to humiliate, but the power to set fair terms. It's the power to walk with dignity, knowing you have options and that you've built your own security. That is the true empowerment money can give when used wisely. Every time I see Valerie managing her investments or planning her family's future, I feel proud, not just of the material success, but because I see a complete woman. She is a woman who can be loving and tough, generous and firm, humble but never weak. Those are the true lessons I hope I taught her. Money was just the tool. The real lessons were about dignity, strategy, patience, and reading people. What would you do in my place? Share your stories with me. It makes us all stronger. My story had a happy ending, but I know not all do. Success isn't just about bank accounts. It's about the character you build and the values you pass on. If your children grow up to be good, hardworking, compassionate people, you have succeeded. I was blessed to give Valerie economic security along with love and values. But even without the money, I would still be successful because I raised an extraordinary woman. So do not be discouraged if your circumstances are difficult. Keep going, keep working, and keep loving. The fruits of your labor will show. Maybe not how you expected, but they will, because love and effort are never in vain. They always leave a mark. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.